Hi class, Professor Susie. I thought I would go ahead and provide you with an alternative to the course project rubric. The rubric has a lot of moving parts and it tends to, really be intimidating to some students for that reason. So I thought I would provide you with something visual and a breakdown of the steps that I'm looking for from you. So I've kind of distilled the project to 6 steps. And let me get them up here for you on the next slide. Bear with me here a second. The introduction, your first couple of paragraphs, is where you're going to describe the cultural work that you've chosen and that you've been working with in about 2 paragraphs. Being as descriptive as you can and also touching on what you feel the purpose was. Secondly, in your second section of the paper, in a couple of paragraphs, you're going to cover impacts. Who influenced this? Who were the influences for this musician or artist or writer? And how influential has this work been? Who has had their consciousness raised or their work influenced by this work? Thirdly, we're going to do the research questions. In the third section of your paper, you're going to generate a few research questions that can be researched, not something so vague and nebulous and subjective that it doesn't lend itself to research, but you're going to come up with some sort of practical questions around your cultural work, and then also talk about how you would go about the process. And the hint here is the Shapiro Library databases. Moving into the fourth section, why do humans in general have a need to express ourselves? Is it spiritual, psychological, emotional? Where do you feel that comes from, or why do we do it? Why do we have this need? And then shift quickly and just give me a couple of sentences on the topic of a cultural shift or event around your cultural work. In other words, what was going on in that society at the time? Was it the civil rights movement of the 1960s, for example, or what was going on that was kind of relevant to this cultural work? And then a sentence or two on the topic of a course concept or a resource within our course that has kind of informed your response and that has been helpful to you in formulating these comments. Next to the last section, consider some examples for me of 2 or 3 separate, different, distinct from your cultural work, examples of creative impacts of musicians, artists, or writers, and the impacts that they have made and those who have impacted them. Whatever examples interest you, it should be a little separate from specific examples that are separate from your chosen cultural work that most of the paper is about. The last section of the paper, I'm looking for a couple of specific examples of how writers, artists, or other creatives can raise awareness about social issues such as climate change or racism or voter suppression. Use try to come up with specific examples there for me. Okay, moving to the introduction, let's drill down into the introduction. Again, this is where you're going to describe your choice, why you selected it or were drawn to it, what is compelling for you about the way this artist uses color or shapes or space, or the way this songwriter chose lyrics or word choices, what the musical genre involved is, and, so on. If it's a filmmaker, what was, or a film that you're talking about, what for you was compelling about the acting and or the dialogue, for example. And then give me a sentence or two about why it was created, what the purpose was. In step 2, the second section of your paper, again, just a couple of paragraphs. How has this particular work changed the culture? What other artists or writers or other, segments of society or demographics have been changed by this work? Who has been influenced by it, or how has it raised awareness? Step 3 are your questions, your research questions. Again, these should be questions that can be researched, about your cultural work. What kinds of questions have come up for you around this creator's life or around this particular work? It shouldn't be so philosophical or subjective that there's no way to answer it. And how would you proceed? Hint again, Shapiro Library databases. Interviews are a fine strategy, as are surveys, but you're not going to tell me, hopefully, that you would start by Googling the topic. You're going to start with library sources and library subscription databases, because those are ideal. In the 4th section of the paper, again, just a couple of paragraphs. Why do humans generally feel this need to express ourselves? Where do you feel that comes from, or what are some of the major reasons? It could be to express our spirituality or to honor our God. It could be a labor of love done out of love, inspired by romance. There are quite a few possibilities there. But try to come up with a thoughtful paragraph about that. And then shift to a sentence or two concerning a specific cultural shift or event relevant to your choice. The civil rights movement of the 1960s, or Black Lives Matter, or 9/11. There are lots of possibilities depending on the choice you've made and, when your cultural work was completed. Step 5, a couple of paragraphs or so on, what was changed or who was impacted by this work. How was the art world or the music industry or the film industry or the publishing industry, changed by this person's work or this work? What is different now as a result of this being made or created? And next to the last section, step 6, you're going to consider how artists or writers or other creatives generally can raise awareness in our society about social issues, climate change, voter suppression, sexism, and so on. But try to work with specific examples there. What have writers done? Banksy comes to mind, the anonymous graffiti artist, who has, raised awareness in a fun, cool way about a number of these social issues. So, give me ideally a couple of specific creators and specific works that are shining examples for you of how this awareness can be raised. And lastly, and it's not in my slides once again, but you are going to try to cite your sources in APA format to the best of your ability. I'm not going to, go over your citations with like a fine-tooth comb and pick them apart, but I do want to see the effort. And that includes in-text citations within the essay that key to the references page. So do reach out ideally before the due date of Sunday, February 19th, to pose any questions or ask me for clarification about anything, or just to chat with me about how your project is going, or any concerns that you have. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching and listening. Hopefully this is helpful. Thanks.